think we were around the dinner,
Sorry,
table.
recording it.
Do I need to do something?
Nope, you're good, Doug. Keep going.
Around the dinner table, and I think early October, my junior year in high school, and he goes, my brother and I were still home. My other two siblings were in college. He goes, well, your mom and I decided that we're going to move to California in January, 3 months. It was like, wow, really? He goes, yeah, we're going to go grow grapes. And it was like, wow, really? I mean, I'd heard some rumblings, but it was like, boom. And it was like, okay, here we go. And, I'd grown up in this house for 17 years, and all my friends, sports, girlfriends, all that stuff was like, hey, we're going to Napa Valley. I didn't know where it was, but basically all I heard was California. And when you're 17 years old, male, and you hear California, you basically think Malibu, Laguna Beach, bikinis, I'm there, I'm in. So, and all my buddies at high school in Chicago were like, Shafer, you win, send us postcards, let's go. And so but it was really kind of cool because my folks were jazzed, and they were like, my brother and I took our lead from them. It was like, let's do this, let's go. And it was really cool. And we packed up the station wagon and grabbed the Labrador Retriever, and mom flew, but dad, my brother and I drove out in the middle of January across the Midwest through snowstorms, heading for California. It's like we were in a wagon train. And I thought we were going to LA, but we weren't. We went to Napa Valley, and we pulled into Napa in third week in January in 1973, almost 50 years ago. And it was brilliant green, because everything's green here in the winter versus Chicago, where it's gray and black and snowy. And it was 70 degrees, and it was like, oh my gosh, what's this? The most beautiful place I've ever seen in my life, and I'm going to live here. So it was pretty easy. It wasn't a problem.
And so you're like, this was really kind of your first exposure to like the wine country, wines, any of that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, we were not a wine drinking family. We didn't drink wine. Dad was bourbon and beer. If they ever had wine around the table, I think it was Mateus or Lancers. And some people say, well, why did he do it? Well, he had been a book publishing executive for 22 years, and he was in charge of long range planning. So his job was to read the tea leaves. What's the next cool thing? Like today would be, the next TikTok or Instagram, whatever the newest trend is. And he kept coming across the pending wine boom in California. So he had come out here a year before we moved, and actually bought this vineyard as an investment to move out here in 10 years, retire and grow grapes, that type of thing. But basically, once he bought the vineyard, that was, the hook was set. He was like, let's do it. So within a year, he said, let's go, let's do it now. And he was 48.
So what did he see in Stag's Leap in particular? And actually, for the people who don't know here, I mean, can you talk a little bit about Stag's Leap?
Well, Stag's Leap is a sub-appellation of the Napa Valley, a small sub-appellation. It's about 2 miles long, 1 mile wide. Very well known for Bordeaux varietals, Cabernet Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot. The wines from this area, this little corner of Napa, are really, really very, very, very pretty. Soft tannins, rich, a lot of flavor. But there was no Stag's Leap then. I mean, there was this area called Stag's Leap, but back in 73, it was just Napa Valley. And he didn't know anything about Stag's Leap or appellations or anything. And no one actually did at that point. What this place did have, it had hillside potential. He had read in some book that hillside vineyards can produce the best wines. And back then, no one planted hillside vineyards because they cost twice as much to develop, and you got half as much fruit. And at that time, growers got paid by the ton. So why would you plant a hillside vineyard? You're only getting 2 tons per acre compared to flatland where you get 5 or 6. So no one did it. But he had this crazy idea about doing it. So he came out, there was 30 acres planted, 60-year-old vines, replanted that, and started developing about 10, 15 acres of hillside vineyard land that had never been planted to grapes. So that was what he was doing in the 70s.
And you spend a lot of time, I know, like from the book and reading it about removing rocks, you and your brother, and just an
Oh yeah,
extraordinary amount of
it
time.
was it was a drag. I mean, in Chicago, we'd have to go out and mow the lawn and maybe weed the flower bed, and out here it's like we're out in a 40-acre vineyard with a tractor and a hauling a little sled, pulling these rocks out of the vineyard, and I mean, it was hard work.
Yes. Um,
but it was fun.
and that led you to well, I mean, it led you, I guess, to studying wine, but it wasn't assured that you were going to get into the business at one point in time.
No, I was here for a year and a half, and doing the college application thing, and the deal was, small liberal arts school, let's go. I almost went to Colorado College. I was about to sign up there, and I had gotten accepted at Davis, and right at the last minute, I went the Davis route. And, you got to remember it, back in 73, 74, when I went to college, there was no Shafer Vineyards. It was just dad growing grapes. In fact, he sold to the co-op winery for a while. He didn't make his first wine until 1978. So there was no winery in the future for me. The reason I went to Davis is I wanted to work outdoors. So I was here for a year and a half watching dad deal with consultants, guys helping them lay out new vineyards, irrigation guys, soil guys, vineyard managers, and all these folks look, I'm 17. They drove a pickup truck. That's really cool. They wear jeans and work boots, no coat and tie, and that's cool. And they get to work outside. So I basically went to Davis, not to be a winemaker, but I went to Davis to get a job in agriculture, to work out of a pickup truck. That was the motivation.
But at one
That
point,
kind of depressing. Don't you want me to say, I want to be the best winemaker in the world?
Yeah. But I mean, at one point you talked about teaching or whatever after, right? I mean, getting back into that. Yeah.
Thanks. Adam, thank God you're here keeping me on track. So I went to Davis. I started doing plant science, viticulture. I'm 2/3 of the way through. I'm doing all the science, all the botany, starting to take some winemaking classes as a minor. And then I was a junior and I realized, I've always wanted to teach. I was a camp counselor forever. I loved it. So I want to check this out. In fact, so I basically decided I wanted to get my credential and teach school. And I was so far along in my viticulture degree that my advisor said, hey, finish this up and get the vit degree with a lineanology. And then a lot of electives, instead of taking enology classes, I took education classes, ed psych, philosophy of education, basically teaching prep. And then I graduated and I stayed an extra year at Davis and got my teaching credential, and went down and taught junior high school in Tucson, Arizona for a couple of years before coming back to Napa.
And so one of the things that happened, I mean, skipping a little bit ahead, 1978 was the first wine, right? The first Shafer cab your dad made.
Correct.
I remember at Seduri, my assistant winemaker, Ryan Sapaltis, came out with his first wine and it got a 95 or 96 from the Spectator. And then every year after that, he got like 92s or 93s. And people were like, what's wrong with Ryan's wine? It didn't get the 96 that it got that first year. Your dad's first year, 78. I mean, it was a really good year. The wine was really good. And then after that, y'all had some struggles and some difficult times.
Well, it was his first cab was a 78 cab, 1,000 cases off his first hillside vineyard, called the Upper 7. It's actually the Upper 5.96 after a new survey. But that was his first cab, and it was beginner's luck, dumb luck, whatever. But basically, that was the great grandfather to Hillside Select. And there were two hot, cool wines from the 78 vintage. One was the 78 Shafer cab, and the other was the 78 Duckhorn Merlot. And here's to Margaret. We just lost her a few days ago. A wonderful woman. And she and Dan were kind of doing what my mom and dad were doing at that time. And we had a 79 cab that was really pretty. And then we had a couple, 3 tough years. 81, cab was kind of weird. We didn't even release it. And 82 was okay. And I joined up in 83. And Actually, it was a struggle. It was not a home run. A lot of people see Shafer now and said, "Oh, you guys are great. You guys make great wines," which I think we do, which is wonderful. But those first 7, 8, 9 years, it was tough. It was a learning curve. To quote someone I know well, we weren't that cute, and it took a lot of work to figure it out.
Well, it also sounded like, I mean, there were challenges and things. It's so funny, like there was fires, and we talk about the fires that happened in 2020 or just the period we've been going through. But in your book, you talk about a fire, was it 81, 82, right after the Napa Valley wine auction? And so, I mean, some of this stuff's been going on for a while. Some of us are just aren't old enough to remember it, I guess, or weren't there for it. But
well, I got, it's funny you mentioned the 81 fire. By the way, we got to talk about how you and I met. Don't let me forget about that one. But this was really strange. So I came back in 70. When did I come back here? I was in Tucson for a couple of years. I came back, my first crush was at Lake Spring Winery with Randy Mason. I was his assistant winemaker for a couple of years.
Those were really good wines. We carried them in Austin at the time.
The 81 and 82 vintages, I worked at Lake Spring. I just come back in June 81 from Tucson. So I'm working with Randy, in the cellar, learning from him. It was great. And it was mid-June. God, I'd only been back 2 weeks. I walked into work one day and Randy goes, and this had been hot and dry for a couple of days and this wind blowing. He goes, "Fire weather." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Fire weather." And sure enough, that afternoon, Lake Spring was over near Yountville and Shafer's on the other side of the valley. All of a sudden the smoke starts and he says, "You better go home and see what's going on with your folks' place," because I was living there at the time. And somebody had driven down the Silverado Trail from the north and thrown out 3 or 4 Molotov cocktails. It was an arson thing, and just lit this thing up. And windy day, and burned the whole side of the valley, and basically burned right through the Shafer property. We set back fires and saved my folks' house, which had just been built, and it came down, did not affect the winery because the vineyard was a fire break, but it burned this whole hillside. And we were up all night and it was fine, no major damage. But here's the funny story. So that was June of 81. I was at Lake Spring. I was at Lake Spring in 82. I joined Shafer in 1983, January of 83. And I inherited the 81 reds. They hadn't been bottled yet. So I bottled them in spring 83. Sorry for the long story, but it's got an interesting ending. And we're about to release that wine in the, I think, fall of 83. I bottled it in the spring. We're about to release it in the fall of 83. And we were tasting it with our neighbors, which we always did. And something was weird about this 81 cab. It just tasted funny. And we're doing a comparative tasting with our neighbors, and Dad and I, and a couple other consultants we had. Something was off. I checked that thing out with every lab I knew. We plated it for bacteria, for yeast, for Brett, what's going on? Nothing came back. There was nothing wrong with this wine, but it was weird and it tasted weird. And we actually didn't release it because it was just strange and not right. And Dad comes in and says, "We can't release it." I was brand new here. I said, "What do you mean we're not going to release the wine? What about money?" He goes, "No, we can't release this wine because it will ruin our reputation because something's off." So basically, I had 2,000 or 3,000 cases of this wine. We sold it to restaurants, scraped the Shafer label on, put their, restaurant, 200 cases here, 200 cases there. And I never, I didn't think about it for years until this recent thing with smoke the last few years we've had. And it's like, oh my God, that wine was smoke tainted.
Wow.
I'm sure of it. And that, unfortunately, I don't have a bottle left. I got rid of it all, but I'm sure it was smoke tainted.
That would make sense. I was going to ask about that, but I mean, it was kind of early in the season. What was the auction? June?
Yeah, it's June. The fire was like June, I don't know, first week or 10 days, but it does, we've done the research with smoke, man. Even early in the season, it can affect it. And it blew, it burned right through here. And at that time, the Cabernet for Shafer was just right here. We weren't buying grapes or anything like that. So,
in the book, it seems like the 80s, for a large part of it, at least, were challenging times. One thing kind of after the other, but one of the great things was finding Elias during
Yeah,
that.
I got lucky with Elias.
Elias, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. I was here about a year and a half by myself, and realized I needed some seller help. So, and I didn't know anything about recruiters or advertise for anybody. So I sent a letter to somebody I knew up at the enology department at Davis. I said, hey, just put this one ad on the bulletin board. And Elias answered it. And he shows up a couple weeks later. This is March of '84. He's about to graduate. He was graduating in spring, right at the beginning of spring term in '84. He'd worked at a couple of wineries during the summer. He's this, nice kid. He looks like, he was 21 or 2. He looked like he was 16 and still does. And all he had was his transcript. And we took the same classes like 5 years apart, the viticulture enology. So I was like, hey, but I'm looking at you, biochem, you got an A. I got a B. Physics, you got an A. I took it pass, no pass. Remember pass, no pass?
Oh, yeah.
In the world. It's like, this kid's smarter than I am. I got to hire him. So I hired him. That was March of '84. And 39 years later, we're still together. So,
and there was a point in there. I mean, you were the winemaker, but you always talked for a while there, but you always talked about how like you didn't quite feel like you were ready for that, or it was too early, I guess, when you first stepped in.
Yeah, when Dad, let's see, January of '83 or the fall of '82, early '83, his winemaker, the winemaker he had some issues and had to leave. So Dad came to me and said, come on over and be my winemaker. And I said, no. And he said, you're kidding. I said, no, I'm not. And he said, why? I said, I know enough to know. I'd only been working in the cellar for 2 years with Randy. I said, I know enough to know I don't know how to do this yet. And he said, well, I got a problem. It's a small valley. If I hire some other winemaker, they know you're over in the cellar across the valley, you could be moving in here anytime and take the winemaking job. So he actually had to twist my arm and talk me into coming over here. And by the way, I was right. I wasn't ready for this job. And
but then when you hired Elias, there was a period of time where he was working as assistant winemaker or whatever the position that you called at the time. I mean, from what I read and what I know about the wine business, I'm sure he was doing everything. You were doing everything, whatever needed to be done. You do.
Yeah, he's a smart kid, but listen, at that time, he didn't know anything either. We were both
Sure.
good as could be. And we figured it out, and every time you make a mistake, we were smart enough to say, okay, that didn't work. Let's not have that happen again. What can we do to make that from happening again or prevent that from happening again?
Yeah.
And we learned on the job, but it took till, right around 1990, there was 5 or 6, 7 years there where we were making okay wines. They were solid, but we didn't really start ringing the bell till the 90s.
So you do have one pissed off viewer right here, David Graves, who applied for that job.
Oh, David
didn't get it.
Well, that was before. Hi, David. You applied when he gave it to Nico? Yeah.
That is correct.
Yeah.
That is correct. And you left out the other great 78 wine, Dick and Dave's inaugural Cabernet, a barrel's worth of Nathan Fay.
Oh, that's right.
So you need to tell us some Nathan Fay stories.
Well, you tell the Nathan Fay stories, because you guys got to go down and pick his grapes and make his wine, spend the night with him drinking, and his wife Nellie just about killed all of you. But you got the Nathan stories.
That was Kongsgaard. That wasn't me.
Well, David, I got to have you on one of these, so we can talk about Pinot Noir, which apparently Doug's never been jumped into, right?
No, life's too short. I don't want to struggle with Pinot. Jesus Christ, Cabernet's easy. This Pinot you got to be good to make Pinot. And I know my limitations, so I'll stick with Cab.
And I'll just add that Doug is the exception to the rule that anybody who makes fancy Cabernet in Napa thinks that they can just fall off a log and make good Pinot.
Yeah, won't try it.
Yeah. Well, so then with Elias, you at some point named him winemaker because you kind of had to almost. He got a great offer, right?
Let's see what happened with Elias. He was great. He was nailing it. We did a co-winemaker thing for a couple of years, but you know what people don't know? I mean, he was my assistant starting in '84 when you hired on, but we never really, it wasn't really ever like that. We just
Yeah.
were both, we were just both cranking, and Dad was right there with it. The three of us, those were truly really cool days. The three of us were just like, we got to figure this out. We got to figure this out. And they were cool. I mean, on any given day, one of us was bringing a half bottle of wine in from the night before because, hey, you guys got to try this. You got to try this. And it was just, oh, I got to tell you a story. We used to go to wineries like, Sainsbury to see Dick and Dave and to check out their new press or something like that. And I'm walking around with David Graves at his winery, and Elias is there. And all of a sudden, Elias is gone. He's not there. It's like, oh, shoot, he's done it again. And what he would do, he would sneak off and go look around the cellar to see what they're doing and what type of equipment they got. And then so I'm busy with David Graves trying to keep his attention because Elias has disappeared till Elias comes back. And then we leave and we get in the car. Elias is like, okay, well, they got a Buca press, they got this type of pump, and they got this type of filter. It's like, oh, we got to get that too. So he was funny that way. But Elias became winemaker here in, God, when was it? 94, 95.
Okay.
Named winemaker because Dad said to me, Doug, you got to run the place and be president. And I said, great. And I said, well, then Elias should be winemaker. And Dad said, no, you're Doug Shafer. You need to be president winemaker. I said, no, that's BS because Elias will be doing the work, not me. He needs to get the credit. And Dad agreed, which was great. And it was the right thing to do. Plus, everybody in the Valley was calling Elias and offering him the winemaker job. So his loyalty has been absolutely wonderful for 35, 40, no, almost 40 years.
And so in the 90s, during that time period, I mean, Shafer, so that's when we first met. I was at Austin Wine and Spirits at a retail store in Austin, and you came in. And it does not mention much in your book about it, but I mean, at the time, Merlot was the thing. I mean, for me, I mean, you talk about you planting Merlot, but what we were trying to get was you to release more Merlot to the state of Texas, if we could, please, because everybody wanted Merlot.
No, it's true. Merlot, people today can't believe it, but I mean, Merlot was the hot ticket. I mean, it was as popular or more popular than Cabernet. In fact, Merlot put Shafer on the map before Cabernet did. It used to really upset Dad because he'd come back and I'd say, how was the trip? He goes, well, they all want our Merlot, but they don't want our cab. He was all upset about that. I said, Dad, be happy. They want something. It's all good. But Merlot was it. And Merlot is, as a varietal itself, is one of the best wines out there. It's just beautiful. The problem with Merlot is, the challenge is it doesn't grow super well in lots of places. Cabernet is more versatile that way. So when Merlot became popular, people planted it all over the place. And if you're in the wrong type of soil or climate, the resulting wine, Merlot wine, could be maybe not so great, a little bit weird, veggie, wimpy. And so, but then all of a sudden the market was flooded with these Merlots that just weren't that good. And the public said, enough of this, it's not that great a wine. So that's kind of what happened with Merlot.
Yeah. And I remember that. I remember it was like a handful. The Duckhorns, Newton, Markham. Yeah, I mean, there were a couple of people that's what we got as far as Merlot. And you came in to sell wine. And I mean, the Merlot was popular. Obviously, the Cab was popular, but really Merlot was the thing there for a while.
No, it was the thing. And I got to tell you folks, since you listen to this Mr. Adam a lot, how we first met. So I'm in, Austin Wine and Spirits.
Yes, that's correct.
And you're just working the register, but who's the buyer was in the back room and he was busy. He was making me wait, which buyers do sometimes, whatever. But so we're chit chatting and you're like, God, you were just like a punk. You were like a kid. You were like, how old were you?
I was in my mid-20s.
Well, I must have been old. Anyway, you still were like a punk kid. Anyway, but you were a nice punk kid. We were having a nice chat. And you're like, I really want to make wine. I said, yeah. He says, do I need to go to Davis? I said, can I say fuck on this show?
Sure, of course.
He said, fuck no. Sorry about that.
No.
you said, really? I said, no, just go get a job and, work in a cellar, work in a crush somewhere and just ask questions and do it. And if you're into it, you'll do it. You don't need to,
Yep.
you can read books and look at things on, seminars online and all that stuff, or go to seminars and classes on the side, but you can do it. And you said, really? I said, sure. Now I'm not sure if I'm the one that convinced you, but I didn't really think much of it until about, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years later. I read about you and Siduri, and you're getting all these great scores and you're doing it. I said, I know that kid. So
one of the funny things that came in at Austin Wine Spirits, it was a great time. I mean, Leon was part of that group in Austin as well. But one of your neighbors came in, and so I was tasting in the back room, because you couldn't legally taste out front in Texas at the time, tasting in the back room with Terry Thies, some older German wines and all of that. And
Nice.
Dick Stelzner comes in, and Dick doesn't look like anybody who would know anything about German wines. He looks a little more like a kind of overweight plumber. His ass crack was showing a little bit, and I mean, and all of a sudden he comes to the back, and he and Terry start going back and forth about the 69 versus the 71 vintage in Germany and this and that. And I'm like, holy shit, I never saw this, these two meeting up together and going well, but it did. It was fantastic.
It's cool.
Yeah, it was a great time. We were all discovering things about wine. We were all excited about it. And reviews started becoming a big thing then too, and ratings and all of that. I mean, before that, they were kind of important, and I love in the book, you talk about it like you don't get too over your skis when you get a great rating or a great review, and when you don't get too depressed when you get a shitty one, because it happens sometimes.
It does. Yes, it does.
Yes. But you went through a period of time there when you were starting to get like in the 90s and all that, or you went through a period, you still are doing it, but you were getting like, you got 100 from Parker. You had a wine of the year from the Spectator, all sorts of things like that. That would be hard not to get too far over your skis and too excited about things.
No, I can help you out with that one, Adam, because we all put our pants on one leg at a time. So you mentioned Mr. Parker, who's a great guy. I mean, he's actually, in his time as reviewing wines, he was Elias's and my favorite, because I gotta tell you, if you've never met him, he's just way normal. I mean, he loves rock and roll, classic rock. I mean, he's just a normal guy. But
the jokes are amazing.
But I got to read you one of his reviews. Yes, he's given me, Shafer, some wonderful scores through the years, but let me read you this one. So I have this on my phone, obviously, because it's good to keep yourself kind of grounded. So this is Wine Advocate, issue number 39, June 1985. Quote, Shafer has consistently made good Cabernet, but these two offerings in 1982 are disappointingly poor efforts. The regular wine is dark ruby in color, but excessively stemmy with hollow flavors and a bitter finish. The Reserve, which was the precursor to Hillside Select, the Reserve is even worse. Very vegetal and stemmy to smell, full-bodied and alcoholic, but little true varietal flavor is present. Both wines should be avoided. The 82 regular cab got 67 points. The 82 reserve cab got 64 points.
Wow.
So there you go.
But those were days also where critics would give you like shitty ratings, and they wouldn't, like a 92 or 93 was a huge rating at times. And
that's true.
And that has changed a little bit with critics. I mean, I guess this is kind of from the historical trail, kind of a divergence from that, but whatever. What do you think about that? I mean, do you think score inflation is kind of a real thing? Is it hard to differentiate between, a bunch of 98 point, 99 point rated Cabernets?
No, I got to tell you, Adam, you know me, I don't pay really any attention to it. We forever here at Shafer never really pushed points. We would publish the comments, and I didn't want to play the point game because, as you said earlier, it can flip on you really fast. If you live by points and all of a sudden you get, an 82 or a 68, you're toast. It's better to be. Our approach, Dad's and mine, was tell the stories, get people to taste the wine. That was the most important thing. Get people to put the wine in their mouth, and if they know it, they like it, and if you can show them that you consistently make good quality wine every year, no matter what varietal, then you've got customers for the long term, and they become more confident. And so even if they see a lousy score, they'll say, I don't care. I know that. It doesn't matter if it's Shafer or anybody. I know that brand, and they stand by what they do, and I believe in it. That was always our goal, to reach that message, and have that happen, because our feeling was that will take you through good times, bad times, any times. If you're dependent on scores, it's totally been inflated. I mean, I hear people talk about 100-point wine, 100-point wine. It's like, no. I mean, find what you like, experiment. I still keep looking for that $70 red Burgundy that's a really good wine, and I just can't find one. And David Graves agrees. My problem is I buy a case at a time without tasting it. That's not a good thing to do. Just try a bottle first.
Well, and one of the things that is interesting about Shafer is you kind of had to tread that little bit of that. You're kind of the cult wine with the hillside, but then other things are more widely available. I mean, that's a interesting balancing act.
Oh yeah, that was fascinating, because the Hillside Select is kind of its own entity, and cult's a funny word, but that was kind of a weird thing, and allocation and supply and pricing. But it was never the Hillside Select wines of the world out there. They're not the real wine business, and there's a few people on here who are in the business and distribution. And the real wine business for Shafer was Chardonnay, Merlot, and Cab, and TD9 today, or whatever it was. Where you've got thousands of cases, and it's a competitive price point. You've got it, and you're battling for market share or shelf space or space on the wine list. That's the real wine business, and it's not easy. It's tough. People think it's easy. It's not, and that's the reality of the majority of the wine sold out there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The time on the road is fantastic in some ways, but it's exhausting.
Yep.
And one of the things, I didn't even tell you I was going to bring this up, but it's worth noting. I think it's also difficult. I mean, the wine business, Diana and I ended up splitting up. You and your first wife split up, John, your dad. And it takes a toll personally. Sometimes the wine business does.
Yeah, you can't, I'm not going to blame, the wine business on that, but it's tough. I mean, whether you're in the wine business or any business, if you're traveling a lot, that's tough on family.
It is. It's away from home and kids and all of that. You and I were talking before today, like my son was sick today. He's 16. He's far bigger than I am. And yet I got to treat him like a baby today, which was kind of cool in some ways. Not that I'm happy that he's sick, but you miss occasions with your kids and things with your kids when you're out there really peddling wine all the time. That's true.
That's why you're jumping on red-eye flights so you don't miss the ballet recital or the soccer game or whatever. But we all did it. It's part of the deal.
Yeah, I think for a lot of folks too, it becomes all encompassing. I mean, wine becomes not just the job that you're doing, but then you get together with friends, and they're the friends that are in the wine business. And I mean, you told me you have tomorrow. You get to go out with your painter.
I'm going out with my house painter.
Which is
I've
cool.
known this guy for 20 years. He's been great. And we all of a sudden we're the same age. He goes, "Let's do lunch." I said, "Yeah, let's do lunch." I can hardly wait.
Yeah,
especially because we're not going to talk about wine.
I mean, most of my friends are in the business in some way, shape, or form. It's kind of where it all heads.
Yeah, that's okay. Actually, my experience has been, my best friends in my life are people I've met through the business.
Yeah.
And
Do
that's,
you
and it's, I wouldn't have those relationships without it. So,
do you think that has changed a little bit about Napa? I mean, one of the things like the fires, they happened before. There's some things about Napa I think remain constant, but it's gotten more of a business. It's harder to get together with people in ways where we just don't find the time to do it.
oh, I don't think so. I don't know if I'd agree with you on that one. I think
Okay.
I think it's more, Adam, it's more, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I think it's more of just, it's a new generation. You know, I've been doing this 40 years. You know, I'm now one of the old guys, you know, and it's just a fact. You know, life goes on, time goes on, years go on. There's a whole different generation coming up, you know, and I don't hang with those guys and gals, and but I'm sure they're hanging. I'm sure they're getting together and having a beer and talking about this or that, and you know what's, you know, when to pick, when to this. I think it's just, I think it's more, I'm just not tuned into those guys because I'm hanging out with, you know, folks my age, you know, my friends I've had for 30 and 40 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes
Agreed.
sense. I find that depending on your involvement in sales or what's going on, sometimes it's just hard to find the time right now for me to, like, Mike Officer, who owns Carlisle Winery, he's my best friend, and we're getting together for lunch on Thursday, and we haven't seen each other since before harvest, really, and it's tough.
Yeah, but you know, you can't beat yourself up over that. That's just part of the way it goes. When you're cranking, especially, you know, when you're coming up, you know, you're just, forget about friends, forget about hobbies. You're just trying to keep it together at your job and your family, you know, and then all of a sudden, you know, I'm experiencing this right now. All of a sudden, you know, I'm not as busy at work as I used to be. It's
Sure.
like, wow, there is time for a hobby. You know, it's like, shoot, I wish I would have started something a few years ago, but that's okay. I got time. I'm reconnecting with friends. That's kind of cool. It's different. And every time I hook up with somebody to have lunch or coffee or a glass of wine, it's really been fun because I get little tidbits of, just little snippets of stuff, life, you know, thoughts, ideas that I never had time for before because I'm so busy driving. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with driving. That's just part of the deal. It's just, it is what it is. It's neat to just switch gears.
So, I mean, you've alluded to it now a few times, kind of, and all that, but obviously in the last year, big news was you selling the winery. And I'm not going to be having sold a winery myself. I'm not going to get into all the credit, you know, the press is always like, how much, what's he going to do? That kind of thing. You know, those are the things that everybody wants to know. But I mean, how did it come about, the sale kind of, and how did the kids feel about it? How did you tell employees? I mean, all of that, because the story in your books or like your involvement with employees and they're close. It's a close-knit group that you have there.
Well, a lot of this I really can't talk about just because of the
Sure.
nature of the deal. You understand that, but
Yeah.
suffice to say, it was not an easy decision, but it was the best decision for my family. And I'm talking about the extended family, not just my immediate family. And, you know, it wasn't about the money. It was about family harmony. And I'll leave that as it is. If you think it was an easy decision, it was not. It was very difficult. It's still difficult, but I'm fine with it. And what's great is the new owners, what I'm really happy about, the new owners are all about quality. And they're showing it right and left. So they went out and purchased a fantastic vineyard. We've been buying the grapes from for 15 years, and we bought it so we can have it, which is really cool. Moves like that. Elias, you know, they want to make a little more wine, not a ton more wine, which is cool. So Elias is in heaven. He's ordering new tanks and new presses and new crushers like a bandit. He's having a good time. And they kept everybody on. Everybody that worked here, you know, got to keep their job and stay on, which has been great. So that was an unknown for me at the time. So that worked out really well.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I said, I know there's only so much, having gone through it myself, there's only so much you can talk about, but it's never an easy decision, this kind of thing. I mean, you think about it a lot. There's a lot of things, to me, those, there were things I would think about, like, what about my kids? Do they want to take over? How are they going to feel about?
Oh, my kids were all good. They're all very gainfully employed and pursuing their own passions. And
Mine were younger at the time, so I was taking a chance kind of about,
right.
you know, are they going to be pissed at me saying, why don't we have Siduri kind of thing?
Well, they can go out and make their own Siduri. You can help them out.
Sure.
There'll be money ahead having you on board. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's what I always thought, is that you could have, there's something good about the struggles that go with it, but, you know, having a little bit of a leg up isn't the worst thing.
I'm with you.
Yeah,
It's all right. They'll all do okay.
sure. You ever think about like what your dad would have thought? Was that ever a consideration?
Well, Dad's not around. So,
I know.
No, I'm not worried about Dad. You know, years and years ago, when we were starting off, he actually cornered me one time in the cellar. It was like 8 at night. We're both heading home. He said, this is before we'd hit it. He said, hey, I go, what? He goes, I want you to know something. This is like the early 90s when we were starting to have it happen. I go, what's that? He goes, this business. I said, yeah. He goes, you need to know that I don't expect this to like be something that goes on for 400 years. And I was like, you know, first it caught me totally off guard. I was like, huh? And he goes, this has been great. I never thought that, you know, one of my kids would be working with me. You are, and it's going well. And we've got years ahead of us, which is cool. But I want you to know that I, John Shafer, don't expect this to be a, you know, many generation business. I said, okay. He goes, looked at me kind of funny. He goes, I just thought you'd want to know that. And then it kind of hit me. It's like, oh, you know, you're not putting that monkey on my back. And he wasn't, which was really sweet.
No, that is really cool, because I think sometimes we are, I don't know if it's fair to say burdened, but there's this history in Europe sometimes, or you're taught about, or you hear about it, and it seems very romantic to pass it down and pass it down and pass it down kind of thing.
Oh, come on, Adam, you brought it up. You want me to go there? So let's think about that European model. So how's that work? So some couple has 3 or 4 kids. They've got a famous vineyard and winery. And how's it work in Europe? Eldest son gets it, right?
Yep.
Boom. The whole kit and caboodle. Well, so what about the other kids? You never hear about that.
No, I actually one time went to a tasting.
I mean, seriously, how's that work out?
I went to a tasting at Gaia with Gaia, the daughter, and somebody asked her about and she's the oldest, and she was like leading the tasting, and they asked her about like winemaking and stuff going forward. And she's like, well, and I don't remember the age at the time, 13, 15-year-old brother will take over the winemaking. I'm like, what? Why would and I mean, it was largely because it was a male. And I mean, that's ridiculous. In Burgundy, the tradition is you have 3 kids, you split the vineyard up 3 ways, and then their kids split that up. So everybody ends up with like a row and a half, if you're lucky, kind of thing. It's a mess. And then the tax situation over there is a mess. So I get it. There's just a romanticism about that is associated with that.
Well, you're just a hopeless romantic. I'm gonna have to slap you around when we have lunch.
Sure, you can. No, I agree. I am. So tell me, like right now, about the Shafer lineup. So there's no Merlot.
There's no Merlot. We've got one white wine Chardonnay, the 2021 Red Shoulder Ranch, Carneros Vineyard. Then we've got TD9. TD9 is a red blend. It's mostly Cab. I think it's around 60% Cab, and then some Merlot and Malbec Petit Verdot. And then there's 1.5 Cabernet. Then there's a Relentless, which is a blend of Syrah and Petit Syrah. And then we've got our Hillside Select Cabernet, which is 100% Cab.
And you played with Sangiovese for a while, but that didn't.
Yeah, that's long gone. We did that for about 10 years. A wine called Firebreak, which we love. But that was, the grapes were planted on some gorgeous hillside, which is making better Cabernet than Sangiovese.
I mean, one of the things that I know came up was at the time, so your vineyard, and David asked about this earlier too, when your dad bought the property, it wasn't planted to Cabernet, and people thought it might actually be too cool, right, for Cab?
Yeah, back in the day, that was Nathan Fay. He was the first one to plant cab down here, and he used to tell me the story. Everybody thought he was crazy. It's too cold down there in Stags Leap to plant Cabernet, and he did it, and he did it well, and everybody followed. And I think a lot of it might have, at that time, this is back in the 60s. I think a lot of it had to do with the quality of the plant material. I think there was a lot more virus plant material, and if you've got virus grapevines, they grow, they ripen, the grapes ripen fine, but if you've got a lot of virus, it takes longer to ripen. So down here at that point in time, it might have been tougher to get it right, just because of, I think the plant material wasn't the best at the time.
So things like Syrah, Petit Syrah, I mean, has the climate change? Have you noticed the climate change, or things ripening differently?
Yeah, 3 or 4 years ago, I'd said, no, I'm not noticing it, because I remember 84 was hot as blazes, and different years have been cold, different years have been hot, but no, something's going on, big time. I mean, we had this heat spell this year. God, what was it? 4 or 5 days of over 110. I mean, we would get 110 during the harvest once in a while, but it would be like for a couple of days. It wouldn't be for 4 or 5. And this was like, wow, what is this? So that was really strange. So it's a little spooky. But then, a couple of years ago, it was a cold year, and it was tough to get things right too. So I mean, there is variation, but there's some of the extremes. I'm not telling anybody anything that you guys haven't heard or seen yourself. It's the extremes they're starting to be kind of strange and concerning, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that is an issue. I don't know how you're set for water there, but drought in some of the places I deal with is becoming a real issue too.
Drought's an issue. Waters will continue to be an issue, without a doubt. But Adam, it's farming. I've been doing this 40 years, so have you. There's always something. We had phylloxera. You've got, the vine mealybug. You've got, what's the challenge? What's the yearly challenge? There's always some new bug or virus or something going on. And even the smoke thing, which is spooky, but the folks are researching and figuring stuff out. I bet. I don't know. I bet in a couple of years they'll come up with something. If you've got a smoke tainted wine, they'll have something you can fine it with and get rid of it. I'm confident of that. I've seen it a lot through the years.
So we had a question about like labor availability now too. How, I mean, is that something you've been dealing with, obviously?
It's always a challenge, but it seems to work out. We work with a lot of, management companies who, contract labor, and it hasn't been, it's something to pay attention to and get yourself lined up every year when you need it, but it's been okay.
Do you think, I mean, one of the things, like Elias's family lived in Napa, he went to high school, that I think it's become harder in Napa and in Sonoma for that matter for people to really grow up there, though. They have to live in American Canyon, or they have to live someplace out of the area that come into work.
Oh, a lot of the labor, not just in vineyards and winery, but in hotels and restaurants, do not
tasting rooms, all of that.
They do not live in the Napa Valley. They live in Richmond or American Canyon or Fairfield. They've got to commute. Yeah, so that's a challenge, because it's a small place, and there's not enough housing for them, or affordable housing. So that's an ongoing community challenge, not just for the wine business.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a major issue, because I mean, one of the things in your book that you talked about was so many people, like you went to high school with all these people, or you go here, so many people turned out to be something in the business, and you grew up together, and that was a thing, and it's harder to see some of that now.
Yeah, but it works out, it just does. People figure out a way.
So there have been a few articles recently kind of down on Napa. It's become the, Disneyland, it's hard to pay for it and all that, but you seem still very optimistic about the future for Napa.
Napa's been getting shot at for at least 25, 30 years. I mean, okay, fine. Let me pour you a glass of Napa Valley Cabernet. It's really good. We're in a really, really unique, special place. I'm not knocking Sonoma or Mendocino or anywhere. There's great wines coming from all over the states, all over the world. And, Napa Valley it's a sweet spot. It's not the only sweet spot, but we do Cabernet here in this valley really, really well. And I don't know, if people want to take shots at you, that's fine. Has it become a popular place? Are there fancy restaurants and hotels? Yes, there are. And you can cry and say, oh, I wish it was like the old days. It was more fun. Well, yeah, that was the old days. That was fine. And things change. I mean, Austin, Texas,
Yeah.
when did the big buildings happen in sweet little cool hip Austin?
It takes an hour and a half to get across town sometimes.
Okay, so I mean, we can complain about it, or we can just embrace it and say it's change, and we move on. And I'm speechless. Hard to believe.
Well, I mean, I agree with you. I actually have written an article I wanted to send to you. I don't know where I'm ever going to publish it, but about how some of the complaints about Napa, some of the things have been going on forever, like larger corporate companies coming in and buying places. Well, 69 and 71, what BV and Inglewood sold within a couple of years of each other for giant dollars. I mean, huge amounts of money given current dollars worth. And the percentage of wine that was in Napa at the time, that was huge, and those occurred within 2 years.
Well, and there is a change in ownership in this valley. It's happening. I've lived through it myself personally, and there's other wineries like me, other family wineries, and people say, oh, isn't that sad? Isn't that sad? Isn't that sad? It's like, yeah, it's sad, but it's also changing times. And one could argue that a family winery not being family owned anymore and being owned by a larger business with deeper pockets might actually be better for that winery long term, to be able to withstand drought or virus or having to replant, to have the money or the backing to be able to do it, to be able to continue producing good wine. And I think if they say, gee, if someone buys a family winery, the quality is not going to be as good. I would take issue with that. I think it could be as good or even better. And the guys who purchase, the corporations, I think, who are buying these family wineries, they're not dumb. They do their homework. They know they've got a really special, unique thing. They're not going to mess that up, because if they mess it up, then the profits go right out the window. So I think you got to give it some time. I really do. It's not all big, bad, and evil. Okay, is it this? But because the family winery, if they get hit, a financial hit they can't take, they're out, and so then the whole thing's gone. So it's a tough one.
It is.
I'm running on here, folks. I hope I'm not boring you all.
No, I think people are interested. I think people want to see kind of where somebody like you, who's been around for 40-ish years, looks at the future and where you see things are going. And I tend to be optimistic. I tend to look at things and say it's going to be different, but everything's different.
Everything's different. And you run your own place. You grew it from nothing, and so did I. And let me tell you something, a business like this, if you're not all in, fully engaged, passionate, working 6 to 6, I've worked, I'm not going to say that. No matter what, I mean, you live sleep, breathe, eat this thing, you know, you're not going to make it, because this is farming and it's tough. And it's, you know, all the winemaker dinners and all the la-di-da stuff you guys see us all doing, that's not, you know, it's brutal, and it's a tough business. And if you're not all in and have the passion, you're not going to make it. And so, you know, whether that's family or corporate, you know, we'll see.
Yeah. I was packing, I posted a picture and it got a lot of response today. At 5 a.m. I was in the garage packing up wine shipments. This morning.
Oh man, I'll come over and give you a hand. I got some time.
Good. Somebody wanted to know about some older hillsides, like 91 through 94 time period. Apparently they have some in their cellar. Any clue on what they're doing?
God, I popped to 92 a few weeks ago. 90s, 90, 91 is when we started really making good wine. So in my opinion, and those wines are holding up. That's getting pretty old. I would, if you've got those around, I would drink them up, because they're not going to get any quote better at this point, but they're still hanging in there, I would think.
And one of the things I've always found interesting too is like your shards. I mean, how did those age? Because I've had a couple of older ones there and they've aged, I thought, extremely well.
Well, thank you. I'd rather be drinking older Burgundy.
Okay.
But no, the shards hold up okay. I mean, I think they're pretty tasty for 3 or 4 years. I like white wines to be pretty young and bright and good acidity. So, you know, a typical California Napa Valley Chardonnay, you know, after 4 or 5 years doesn't really do it for me. But some people love it, and it's just a different animal. It's this rich, neat, caramely, and all that cool stuff.
There's a little conversation going over on the chat about one of the things they're finding about Napa that is a problem for them is it's become much more expensive just to visit as a whole.
Yeah, it is. It's pricey. It's really expensive. Agree with you there.
Yeah, no, that's a frustration I think people feel.
Yeah.
I mean, things are, we're kind of at the end here. So if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to toss it in. But I mean, it seems like, well, I guess talk about current vintages. What do you got coming up and what should people look forward to?
We've got 18 Relentless out right now. That's the 20th year we've made that. We've got the 18 Hillside Select, 40th year we've made Cabernet off this ranch, the 2018. 2019 1.5 and 2019 TD9 are both solid, nice year. And then we've got the 21 Red Shoulder Ranch Chardonnay.
Did you have to skip most of 2020 or how did that?
We skipped the whole enchilada. We did not pick a grape in 2020.
Whites and reds or just reds?
Whites and reds. Everything.
Wow.
No, we took a good look at just a lot. It was a real tough time. It was the in my business career, there was the easy, at the same time, it was the most difficult and easiest decision I've ever had to make. And it broke my heart.
Yeah. So somebody asked real quick, just one thing, if you had to invest in a wine region today, say you were starting over again or whatever, where would you go?
Chablis.
Okay.
If I spoke French, maybe I should learn how to speak French and get over there. I just love those wines. Boy, they're listing, you know, I could come up with 4 or 5. Tuscany would be pretty cool too.
I think one of the, I guess it kind of depends on like if you are doing it just to make great wine, Chablis would be fan, but I bet the land's got to be expensive over there. So like, what's a great investment area? What's kind of overlooked, I guess.
I don't know, man. I think everything's getting tapped out pretty good. I haven't been up to BC, British Columbia, but I know there's some good things going on up there. Washington State. See, I would head north because of this whole climate thing.
Yeah,
I really would. Boy, I don't know. Beaujolais might be kind of cool. I love Gamay.
There's a region in outside of Chateauneuf, Lirac. Lirac is allowed the same grapes as Chateauneuf, but they allow you to put it on trellising, you can do all of that. The land prices are 1/7 the price of Chateauneuf. I was talking to the president of the Lyrac Association, and I'm like, let me market it. Once you go Lyrac, you never go back. And trying that marketing strategy. I think there are a few places you can still find every now and then. I'm not saying it's I mean, I started Siduri with 24 grand. Your dad came out with not much. And I mean, you still got to start with some dollars these days, I think.
Oh, yeah. It's a very capital intensive business without a doubt. So
yeah,
you got to plan for that.
So somebody asked real quick, and I already know the answer to this, but did you drop all that 2020 fruit, or did you sell it off to somebody? I'm sure it all went on the ground.
No, actually, I started dropping it, and some guy pulled in and said to Elias, "What are you doing?" He said, "We're dropping the fruit." He says, "I got a buyer." I said, "Yeah." He said, "So I think we sold it for, I don't know, $1,000 a ton." Somebody came in and picked it and it disappeared. And it probably went into some 500,000 gallon blend of red wine and blended out with other stuff that wasn't smoked and is in some bottle of, XYZ $15.99 red wine somewhere.
There you go.
Is that, should I not talk about that? Is that embarrassing?
No, I'm fine with that. It wasn't the answer I expected.
Every once in a while we'll sell bulk wine, and you guys are in the wine business. The whole idea is you're not supposed to talk about who you get your wine from and all that. But somebody will come up and say, "Well, here's this wine. I heard it's got some Shafer red wine in it." It's like I'm supposed to get upset. I just say, "Yeah, probably does, because it wasn't good enough to be under the Shafer label."
Yeah, makes sense.
Have a nice day.
Yeah. Well, cool. Thank you, Doug, for the time. Thanks for talking about everything, for the walk back in time, and for kind of the look forward. I appreciate it. So,
Adam, thank you. It was great to talk to you guys and talk to the whole team, and let me run off at the mouth. I enjoyed it.
yeah, I did too. Everybody, David, Leon, the rest of you guys, unmute yourself, tell Doug goodbye, and thanks for being here.
Cheers.
Hi, guys. Happy holidays,
Oh.
all that stuff.
Absolutely. You guys are too much fun. David, it's great to see you again. Love and kisses.
Yeah.
My goodness, this is like old school right here, man. I love it. Adam, thank you for the incredible wines you put out. Doug, I remember bitching at you saying, "What are you going to Dubuque, Iowa for? You need to do London, you need to do Dallas, et cetera, et cetera." So what a fun ride, gentlemen. Absolutely. You guys are top notch. Love you guys.
Thanks, Leon.
Thanks to both Adam and Doug. I don't want to say this exceeded my expectations, because I know both of you well enough to know you done good, and it was great to be here.
Thanks, buddy. Good to see you. All right, you guys have a good evening.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.